Max Keiser, where on earth are we going? Break down the points I've made because you've said that you believe by April, that's now only 3 or 4 months away, that it's going to be clear that we're in a full-bore collapse. What is your overall take since you were on a month ago?
Oh, yeah, five months away to April. Holding to my prediction, Alex Jones, that you will have a catastrophic event. And the question was, what would be the trigger? You know, on this show, your show, we talk about the potential trigger points. And one that I mentioned a couple of months ago, which is now on the radar of a lot of people, is in Japan, because Japan has the worst debt situation in the world. And they're bringing in a new government in a couple of weeks who has publicly stated that he wants to bring in a quadrillion in yen printing, and he wants to kill the Japanese yen, which would possibly be the first of the G7 nations to enter into a hyperinflationary currency collapse. So that's kind of where I'm putting my chips right now. I think the global currency collapse could start in Japan, and I'm sticking to my timeline of the next 5 months. I want to direct your attention to something that just came out a couple of days ago. In Switzerland now, they've introduced negative interest rates. This is something I predicted on your show, and a couple of others I predicted a year ago or so. And so if you keep your money in a Swiss bank, they charge you to keep your money in a Swiss bank. It's a negative interest rate. This is a form of a capital control. They don't want people putting their money into Switzerland. So if you're trying to escape, let's say you're a Japanese yen investor and you're trying to escape the yen and you want to put your money in Switzerland, the Swiss government will charge you to keep your money in a Swiss money market or cash account. And right now there are 6 countries in Europe that charge negative interest rates, with Switzerland charging a negative up to a 0.5 percentage point to a point on 2-year paper, and there's 5 other countries that offer negative interest rates. So this idea of putting your money someplace where it's going to be safe, well, these countries have figured this out, and they're charging you to keep your money in the bank. So not only do you have inflation to deal with, but you have the fact that the banks are now openly confiscating your money using negative interest rates. This, of course, will come to the United States soon enough, and so it'll come to the UK as well. Here's another big story from Just Breaking, which is part of what we talked about on your show before. You know, Corrections Corps of America, the company that is the biggest private prison operator in America, the company that just did a deal with 48 states in America saying that we'll take your prison business from you and we'll run your prisons if you guarantee 98% occupancy. That is to say, you put people in prison. Well, it just came out that Corrections Corps of America is using gangs to run their prisons. So this is like a gang Ponzi scheme where the gangs run the prisons to go and put more gangs in prison to run the prison. And then they rotate them out back on the street to be protected by the police, the certain groups to run the drugs, to launder it back through the mega banks publicly who've been caught and don't get in trouble, who then own the subsidiary private prisons. So it's an absolute full spectrum dominance program. And you can buy stock in Corrections Corps of America, and, you know, the elites that Lindsey Williams talks about, I mean, they buy stock in Corrections Corps of America, so it's like buying stock on a plantation from antebellum South, if you wanted to buy, or buying stock in Auschwitz. Hey, wouldn't that be a great idea? You could buy stock in Auschwitz. Of course, I'm sure if Goldman Sachs had an opportunity, they would take Auschwitz public. Well, actually, a lot of the mega banks did fund Hitler, as you know, and then people like my grandfather, they weren't allowed to bomb whole sectors that had Ford and GM factories and slave camps. So, because the war was a huge profit on both sides. And let's take a look at the global debt situation since we were on last. The G7 countries, they've moved from having a debt to GDP of 375% debt to GDP ratio. It's now at 415% debt to GDP ratio. And here's the story and the methodology and the psychosis. Ben Bernanke talks about deflation, and he therefore jacks interest rates down to near 0%. In fact, by putting interest rates near 0%, he causes deflation. He causes now the insurance industry has stated that because interest rates are so low, they can no longer operate as insurance companies. So if you don't have insurance, you don't have private property. If you don't have private property, you don't have capitalism. So the insurance industry is not saying we can't operate with this low interest rate environment. So that's a form of deflation. The wages are getting completely scrubbed. There hasn't been any wage growth in years. That's a form of deflation. And so Bernanke says we're going to lower interest rates to fight deflation. But in fact, by lowering interest rates, he's guaranteeing deflation. At the same time, he is creating, and this is a remarkable statistic, the bond market in America is at a 240-year high. The bond market in the United Kingdom is at a 300-year high. Never have bonds in 300 years in this country, United Kingdom, have been higher than they are now, or in 240 years in America than they are right now. That is a classic bubble. When people say, well, what about this idea that interest rates are going to go higher? Interest rates will go higher when this bond bubble collapses. And this is part of what I'm saying in the next 5 months, the trigger that will create the cascade, the domino effect, probably starting in Japan, toward a global sovereign bond collapse, which means interest rates, which are the inverse of a bond price, go up dramatically. And that's your...
Why is the Bank of England head saying this is Armageddon?
Well, he's now leaving. Mervyn King is on the way out. They're bringing this Canadian in. Here's a perfect example of what you talk about, the New World Order. The fact that you can just plug and play and take a Canadian central banker and stick it into a British institution, the Bank of England, without anyone questioning, well, who are they answering to? They're not answering to the sovereign in which they work. They're answering to a global banking establishment. If you could just take the Canadian central banker and put him into London, then they're going to take who's going to fill the London the Canadian central bank? That'll probably be somebody from the global banking establishment.
And that's like Ireland. It's like Greece. It's like Italy. They just appoint not just the bankers, but the presidents and prime ministers now, and then brag we're in a world government in hundreds of newspapers, but then have the Southern Poverty Law Center say you're a terrorist if you talk about it. And they tell the police in training manuals none of it exists, and the cops are like the general public, don't even know how to tie their shoelaces. They believe it. Recently, the Harvard School of Health looked at more than a dozen scientific studies concerning fluoride and confirmed what countless other scientists have been documenting for decades. Sodium fluoride in the body reduces IQ and increases cancers. You see, the aluminum industry and the fertilizer industries would have to pay to store all the toxic waste they produce. But instead, they get our counties and cities to pay to put the poison in our water. It's not just fluoride we're getting, but lead, mercury, arsenic, the list goes on. And a lot of this toxic waste comes from China. Unfortunately, fluoride and its derivatives are only one of hundreds of toxins being added to our drinking water. We're battling the globalist on so many fronts. Health is an area where we can all take control of our lives, and it all starts with that basic building block of water. It is time to purify our family's water. The ProPure filtration system with added fluoride filters is the best system from my research to protect you and your family. Infowarsstore.com already has the lowest prices on ProPure water filtration. But until December 10th, we are going to offer 15% off the already lowest price. I know what I'm giving my family this Christmas. ProPure. Go to Infowarsstore.com and get 15% off the already lowest price out there with the code WATER15. WATER15, and you get 15% off at Infowarsstore.com. So Whitlock of Fox Sports says if you own a gun or remember the NRA, you are a KKK racist, period. Bob Costas picks up his column and agrees that handguns should basically be banned and guns are causing crime. And now Piers Morgan, we were just talking about foreigners being sent to run England, foreigners being sent to run other countries. That's the New World Order. Piers Morgan has called for a ban of all semi-autos on CNN. CNN anchor rants about gun control. So there you go. I mean, and again, it's amazing that this is what we live under. That's up at Infowars.com. Right now. Long segment coming up. We're going to air a special report on the Second Amendment that Aaron and I put together and then go back to Max here with us. And I'm excited to announce that Max is going to start doing 10-minute special reports for Infowars Nightly News once a week, as well as joining us a few times a month. We're very honored to have him do that. And I should add that you should follow him at Twitter. and also maxkeiser.com. And we're going to put it up on screen, Max. It's at Max Keiser. Very, very simple to follow you at Twitter. And I'm Real Alex Jones, and I've got a at Prison Planet, but I don't know why I don't have a at Real Alex Jones. We'll figure that out. But at Max Keiser, everybody should follow him there for all the updates. And I hope you're wrong, but I do see massive preparations for this. And look at this. Cops to Congress. We need logs of Americans' text messages. CNET News. Guilty until proven innocent. Feds telling states to pass laws allowing highway checkpoints. TSA announces highway checkpoints in all 50 states. They're announcing capital controls, that you won't be able to leave the country now if they say you owe money. I mean, this is becoming Nazi Germany, Max Keiser.
Well, it's not the capital controls. It's not just even trying to leave money, leave the country across borders. It's the central banks don't trust each other. That's why the lending is not being made. A lot of people are complaining that the banks are not lending enough to stimulate business because the banks are hoarding cash, and they're hoarding cash because they don't trust each other, because they know that a credit freeze like in 2008 or a collapse, as I'm predicting will come, they need that money on hand to pay themselves, basically, and they don't trust each other. This is another reason why since 2009 the central banks have been buying gold. This year, they're going to be buying over 500 tons of gold. That's just the central banks. Also, starting next year, Alex, the Basel Agreement will classify gold for banks as a tier 1 asset, which means that you can borrow 100 cents on the dollar against gold that you own. So another big buyer of gold in 2013 will be banks.
And China's doing it. Universities are doing it. Soros is doing it while simultaneously bad-mouthing it. I mean, a lot of this, for me, signals a bull market in gold. Well,
China is due to surprise everybody when they announced their official reserve figures. They officially have 1,051 tons, but now it's pretty much an open secret that they have at least 3,000 tons. They're the biggest gold producer in the world, the biggest gold miner in the world. None of the gold leaves China. There was a report that came out a couple of weeks ago proving or suggesting or indicating that no gold bar circulating in the vaults of any of the banks around the world have any Chinese stamps on them, because China does not let this gold leave China. They're out all over the world accumulating gold. They want to get enough gold in-house to give them protection against that huge reserve of dollars that they have. They have 3 trillion paper money reserves, over $1 trillion of that.
They're massively hedging with gold, and who else is doing that? Basically everybody.
Well, Mexico has increased their gold position by thousands of percentage points. Korea's been buying gold. Every central bank in the world, many of the central banks in the world are buying gold. Some are famously not buying gold, like the Bank of England sold.
What about all the fake tungsten? I heard you talking about that 5 years ago. It's surfacing in vaults and government and private central banks everywhere.
Well, when the paper money collapses, tungsten's not that bad a thing to have. I mean, anything that's not paper is going to be valuable against a paper money apocalypse that's coming. But the tungsten has been an issue for years and years. I mean, it's one of another concern. I mean, you need to keep your head up and make sure you don't.
Sure, my point is the gold-covered tungsten is surfacing everywhere.
The big gold market, and it's not enough of an issue to alter these big trends that we're seeing.
No, I understand. I'm just saying that shows that these Western banks don't have as much gold as they've said they have.
Well, the bigger problem is that they've leased it out. This is why a lot of the gold in central banks' vaults that they've leased out. Now there's a big question mark whether that gold is actually there.
You've got the floor till we go to break, Max. any comments on the gun thing, but getting back into your bold prediction that the collapse is really going to accelerate in April. You've already broken down why that's happening. We've got the head of the Bank of England saying what you're saying now, and you're in England right now. That's pretty creepy. So tell us what it'll look like and where it goes from there.
Hey, well, first of all, O.J. Simpson didn't have a gun. Didn't stop him from killing his wife.
Wow, that's incredible. I actually made that point in the video, but Aaron cut it out for some reason. Yeah, Nicole Simpson, she'd have done nice with a concealed carry when O.J. or whoever it was brought that knife to a gunfight.
Yeah. Well, wasn't Bob Costas involved in that pedophile scandal with Sandusky for a while? He had him on his show, and they were trying to cover that up for a while until Sandusky got on the show and basically admitted he was a pedophile. And then Bob had, you see that image of him all shaken up, like, oh, my God, I invited a pedophile on my show. And then he tried to, talk his way out of it. So this guy's a loser. But anyway, talking about the collapse of the, central bank system and fiat currencies around the world, this is, as I say, baked into the cake. Now, I believe we're going to see it by April of 2013. If I'm wrong, I will happily admit that I was wrong on my timing. The trends are still there and they're still in place. Somebody else will get the timing perhaps better than I have. I'm going to stick to my timing. But, in the United States, it's remarkable that 3 weeks ago, to give you an idea of the disconnect people have with what's happening in the central banks on Wall Street. Remember when there was a threat that we're going to close down the producer of Twinkies? And then within an hour, Twinkies were selling for $8,000 a Twinkie on eBay. Now, that gives you an idea of the disconnect in the United States that the average person has with what the values are that run the system versus what the intrinsic value of a Twinkie actually is. So, you had this remarkable explosion of Twinkie buying on eBay because people were scared that suddenly Twinkies would not be available anymore. And then that mania passed 6 hours or 10 hours later, and it was on to some other mania. People, of course, would probably get totally caught up in an NFL game over the weekend where they can watch steroid-driven drug addicts pound each other over the head for $1 million a quarter.
It's true.
So they're just going from distraction to distraction. But meanwhile, the main theme here that I'm going to emphasize is the central banks themselves that for 30, 40 years were colluding in pushing a financialization, a transactionalization, a world where work and labor was replaced with technocracy and money. They no longer trust each other. That is a fundamental difference today. Started in 2009 after the big collapse of 2008, and we know that they don't trust each other because they themselves are the biggest buyers of gold. Now, here's the big moment that's going to change everything is when central banks who are now issuing money or creating money through quantitative easing to buy government bonds, one of those central banks is going to break ranks and they're going to start printing money to buy gold. And that will be the moment when gold starts to go on a magnificent tear on the upside and the global sovereign bond market starts to collapse. Because one of these banks is going to say, enough is enough. The obvious contenders are China and Russia. Those are the obvious contenders. The obvious contenders for a currency collapse, hyperinflation, we see in Japan and in the UK. The UK is has 900% debt to GDP. It's one of the worst in the world. So that's why we're here, because we're covering the collapse in London. And since we've been here, as you pointed out, the rhetoric coming out of the Bank of England is that quantitative easing doesn't work anymore, the debts are unsustainable, and the economy is collapsing, and there's very little that anyone can do. So that's pretty much the scenario up to this point.
How is raising all these massive taxes in Europe and the United States going to fix things? So they're not idiots. They know when they raise taxes on the poor and middle class, it's going to make these countries like Greece, Ireland, Spain, the United States go into cardiac arrest. But that's what they're doing. The Republicans and Democrats are debating how much taxes to raise instead of talking about, trying to rebuild the country. What's your take on that?
Well, raising taxes will not increase the tax take at the end of the year, because it'll put more people and companies out of business than any incremental gain on a marginal tax increase. So net, the tax take is going to be worse. The reason I point to April of 2013 as my target date for the collapse is because I think the tax revenues reported for 2013 in the United States will be shockingly under estimates, and this will force the major rating agencies, Moody's, S&P, and Fitch, to downgrade the U.S. government bond. They've already downgraded it once.
Sure.
We think we're going to downgrade that again.
But the establishment knows that, so they want to destroy the country.
But the establishment is buying gold. That's what I'm saying. They're buying gold and silver, and because they don't trust each other, and they know that in extremis, even Alan Greenspan famously said that we learned from the collapse of Germany in the 40s that in extremis, only gold is counted as money. And Alan Greenspan, of course, is the maestro of the central bank that is the creator of the bubbles that of course, are the monster that ate the global economy. So for him to even point this out is quite significant. And this is unknown amongst those who understand the history of banking and money, that when you have this type of crisis, gold is really the only extinguisher of debt, is one way to put it.
Sure, and they can continue to kind of put things off, but there's still that slow slide. I mean, the economy worldwide is getting worse and worse. I want to come back and ask you, Max.
Well, the slow slide, it's deceptive because, if you look at a chart like Enron, remember Enron, the stock went from $2 to $90.
I'll tell you what, stay there. Explain it to us on the other side.
As Skynet continues to rise, most Americans have no idea the arsenal their own government is prepared to use against them. Walking weapons and unmanned drones that will find their way to U.S. soil if they haven't already. But the future is not written in stone. Join Infowars for the first ever drone mob December 8th at Zilker Park in Austin, Texas. This family-friendly event is to inform the public of the weapons that target us. Bring your own drones and spy planes as we make the statement that we don't want our weapons turned against us. Be there at 11 a.m. There will be some amazing giveaways and even a video contest. So bring your camera, because whoever films the best drone video at the event and posts it up on YouTube will receive 1,000 Federal Reserve notes. And be sure to use the hashtag DroneMob on Twitter and visit Infowars.com for more details.
Going back to Max Keiser. Okay, Max, go ahead. You've got the floor with the point you were making about any way to arrest these bankers, any way to bring them to justice, but you were making another point as well.
Yeah, no, the guests on your show you've had, and we've talked about this collapse coming, and the question always is when, and I think that it's, if you're standing on the surface of the earth, it's tough to see that you're actually standing on a round object, because it's a very large object. And this crisis is very large. But when it happens, it'll happen quite quickly, because this is an historic bubble we're talking about for bonds. You have to go back and compare it to, let's say, the tulip bulb mania in Holland in 1634. The price of tulip bulbs went from 1.5 to 60 to 0. In France, during the Mississippi bubble, the stock in that Ponzi scheme went from 500 to 18,000 to 0. The South Sea bubble of 1720, the stock went from 100 to 1,000 to 100. Now, more recently, with Enron, the stock went from $2 to 90 to 0. What I'm saying is that the government bonds in America, the U.S. Treasury bond, has never been higher in 240 years. The Treasury bond in the UK has never been higher in 300 years. And when this bubble pops, it'll collapse by 50, 60, 70% with lightning speed, as we've seen with these other historic bubbles. So it'll be too late to do anything at that time. You have to be prepared beforehand. And if you want proof of what I'm saying is true, look at what these central banks are doing. Since 1971, they were net sellers of gold, and they bought paper. But from 2009, after the collapse of 2008 of Lehman Brothers, they became net buyers of gold. They're buying over 500 tons this year. And because they don't trust each other, because they know this bubble is about to pop. I always go with the money. I go with the smart money. China has the money, and they're smart enough to be buying gold. The central bankers have the money, and pretty soon they're going to be issuing money to buy gold instead of the bonds that are in this huge bubble. And so those are the factors that we see in front of our face. And we know that when this bubble pops, this historic bubble, like NASDAQ, from 1981 to 2000, it went from 100 to 5,000, then crashed to 1,500. In Nikkei, remember the Nikkei bubble from 1970 to 1992, it went from 3,000 to 40,000, then crashed to 8,000. At one point, you had in Japan that the land under the royal palace was worth more than the entire state of California.
And once that happened more than 15 years ago, they've never come back in Japan. So you're saying there's going to be a treasury bubble go under?
We're in a bubble, treasury bubble. It's never, oh my God. Alex, the 10-year U.S. treasury bond has not been this high. That is to say,
no, I know. You're saying it's coming to an end. It's obviously the biggest bubble in 300 years. You're saying it begins to pop or will pop coming up on April 15th or thereafter. How bad will it be?
It'll be the worst financial crisis in 100 years, 150 years. Absolutely, without a shadow of a doubt.
Well, I've talked to a lot of big insiders, including well-known billionaires, and they've said the word is all these companies are pulling back and digging in, and so there's a lot of signs this is coming. Is it not, my king, time to spring the trap?
No, we must desecrate the soul and the flesh of the Creator's creation. The chain of life broken forever. A monument to our beauty.
Max Keiser is our guest. And Max, you got the floor still. Other points you'd like to make, we're all ears. I know I want to hear what you have to say. I mean, they're gearing up for a police state. We know they're going to try to just have all these new taxes and regulations. 6 years in jail, $100,000 fines for washing your car with soap suds going in the drain, dog poop, 6 years in jail, giant prisons opening everywhere. I don't think people understand the new labor in America will be slave labor. It already is.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. Because the economy is contracting, it's collapsing, and there's no growth. And you can't create growth by forcing interest rates down to zero. As a matter of fact, that creates deflation and it creates catastrophe, and they're not going to stop. Now, I don't know if you saw this, but on Monday, October 22nd of 2012, was a bombshell announcement from Germany. The statement from Germany included a previously classified report that reveals that the Bundesbank withdrew nearly 1,000 tons of gold from the Bank of England in 2001, decreasing Germany's gold holding in London from 1,400 tons to 500 tons. Now, the reason this is significant is that at the time, Gordon Brown sold 400 tons of Britain's gold. And now we know he did so because Britain was caught without the gold, Germany's gold. In other words, Germany went to repatriate their gold in 2001.
And LIBOR has come out proving it's all rigged. I mean, it's all starting to collapse. I think you might be right about April.
Well, what I'm saying is that Britain had sold Germany's gold. They sold Germany's gold, and then when Germany came to collect their gold, they didn't have it. So Gordon Brown had to force the gold market, crash the gold market by telegraphing a sale of 400 tons, which crashed the gold market down to $250 an ounce, which is considered to be Brown's bottom, the worst price in 20 years, to make good on that claim. And this is important because you've got Austria now and Germany, Venezuela, and all countries around the world that are repatriating gold, not because we're going to a gold standard, but because they are protecting themselves against currency collapse. That's a distinction that people don't understand. We're not going to a gold standard where people have hoards of gold located in banks around the world, and then because of trade imbalances, you will move gold from one stock to another. No, that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about these countries are now repatriating gold or amassing huge gold positions as a way to protect themselves against this fiat currency collapse, which is now a 100% dead certainty due to 0% interest rates thanks to Ben Bernanke and other central bankers around the world that have thrown the global economy under the bus. There's hundreds of trillions of dollars worth of debt. Some call it, derivatives, which is the same, another word for debt, which cannot possibly be paid back in 10,000 years. And there is no growth to pay for it anyway. So all that is going the way of the dodo. And the only thing that can give anyone any semblance of wealth preservation is going to be gold.
I agree. We're almost out of time. Let me just say this. The one heartening thing I see is a lot of these top bankers are buying houses in armored retreats in third world countries and distant islands, and a lot of them are just pulling out and leaving. I think they know they're all going to get arrested. So we might actually be able to expose them and then use the crisis they've created to finally kick out the globalist.
Great.
What's funny about that?
Well, they get on a jet and they're on an island in 2 hours, and we'll never hear from them again. But they're going to leave behind a complete and utter chaos, and there's currently no system to.
No, I agree. We're going to have to talk about this. You want to keep going, Max? You want to keep going in this subject, or do you have?
I am an info warrior.
Stay there. Overdriving. Insider billionaire investors like George Soros and John Paulson have recently made massive moves into gold, purchasing what Bloomberg News described as gold hoards. Soros alone doubled his holdings in a single day. Russia's Vladimir Putin has doubled down on gold, increasing the country's holdings by over 100%. With $1.8 trillion under management, the bond king Bill Gross, the world's preeminent bond fund manager at PIMCO, has warned investors of the dangers of QE3 and inflation. And what's he betting on? You guessed it, gold. Friends, this is Alex Jones for MidasResources.com. For more than 15 years, I have exclusively used Midas Resources for all my precious metal needs. Whether it's bullion or collectibles you're looking for, Midas Resources is simply the best. I own my gold as a hedge against inflation. This Federal Reserve fiat currency could go the way of the Deutschmark and the Weimar Republic anytime. In these historically dangerous times, it makes sense to physically hold gold and silver. Midas already has some of the best deals in the industry. But if you give them a call and mention the radio special, they will give you a list of the day's super specials. Midas brokers are standing by to answer all your questions at 800-686-2237. They also have a lot of informative free literature explaining the opportunities and risk of holding precious metals. They are ready to answer your questions at 800-686-2237. Again, that's 800-686-2237. Devil take the split, the ace of spades. The New World Order is upon us. Monday through Friday, 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. Central, but a lot of times we go into overdrive, and we are live. You know, I'm looking at the YouTube comments on NFL declares war on the Second Amendment for Obama. A highly produced, very powerful video piece I did with Aaron Dykes that Aaron stayed up all night to get completed. And it is now up at Infowars.com. It is now the featured video on one of our big YouTube channels, the one with 252 million views. And we need this to go mega viral because Costas is calling it a mistake because you're so stupid, you don't understand him. His apology is an insult to everyone. So Costas, that's it. You need to be fired. You guys fired Hank Williams Jr. for saying Obama was becoming a dictator. And he clarified to say both parties were bad, and he was fired. Well, you need to be fired then. But I know you just want to get people fired who stand up for America. You want to be able to take our liberties and our basic freedoms. Now, Max Keiser is held over with us into overdrive here right now because we were getting into the economy. But one more point on guns, since he raised it. Yeah, Nicole Simpson and Ron Goldman, that was his name, wasn't it? They were both killed by someone wielding a knife. We all know it wasn't OJ. He's a wonderful person. But the point is that imagine if they would have had guns. But you always read about this place with gun bans like London and Chicago and New York and L.A. where it's highly restricted. People don't have guns. Somebody comes up with a knife and they stab you to death. I mean, somebody comes to me with a knife, or somebody comes to most people in Texas, people carrying guns, you just pull it out and shoot them. I mean, it's like a joke. It's like Indiana Jones and Raiders of the Lost Ark, where the guy's got the big sword and is going to chop his head off and does this fancy move, and he just pulls out his revolver and shoots him. Criminals don't want you to be armed. Criminals support gun control because they want disarmed slaves. And, you know, Bob Costas, it's not his fault that he came and called for a ban on the Second Amendment on handguns. It's the fault of the microphone. I agree with Bob Costas. Guns are at fault. Spoons are at fault for fat people. And Bob Costas's microphone is at fault. And OJ's not at fault. His knife is at fault. O.J. Simpson's knife is at fault. And a guy killed his dad and some other people with a dagger and a bow and arrow yesterday. The bow and arrow's at fault. Sorry, Max Keiser, I'm kind of ranting off into that subject. I'm beginning to understand the logic, though, that I am a racist because I'm against taking guns. In fact, Fox Sports guy says you're KKK. I know KKK passed the first gun laws in the U.S., so you'd actually, the KKK is for gun control, but doesn't matter. I guess he's right, history's wrong, and spoons are evil. Sorry, though. I mean, I guess they did dig out of Alcatraz with a spoon, at least in that Clint Eastwood movie, so maybe it is true. I mean, they say that, you know, Zero Dark 30's real, too. Easter Bunny's real. Sorry, Max, we got 10 minutes left in this segment. You held over. Here's my question. I pointed out, can't we just arrest the globalists? They've committed all the crimes. MF Global got caught lying, stealing the money, didn't get in trouble. I mean, if the law was in place, they would all be going to jail, but you just laughed and said, well, yeah, but they'll all just fly to their island. My point is they're getting the islands and digging in Paraguay and places, and I've talked to some of the, you know, top minions of these people. They are scared of us, and they don't think they're going to get away with it because they were so greedy, none of them could even control themselves. So I understand they're going to leave us with the system, the predatory, cannibalistic, Soylent Green system, but it is a good sign that they don't think they're going to get away with it. Or what's your point on that? And how do we get out of this? How do we bring them to justice? I think we expose that they're the authors of this system. And so that collectivism through corporate fascism is always discredited via the crony monopoly system they've created that they use to scapegoat the free market. J.P. Morgan ran an ad about how they're free market and how they basically brought us America when they're the opposite of free market. How do we defeat that so they can't demonize real free markets?
Oh, yeah, before I forget, wasn't Jimmy the Greek fired for alleged racist comments? Now, if Costas and his crew are saying that Second Amendment supporters are racist, then using the Jimmy Greek standard, that he should be fired.
Well, yeah, I mean, the guy he quoted, he said he endorsed the columns, says that just inherently whites are racist and inherently gun owners are, quote, KKK.
Oh, okay. Well, they fired Jimmy the Greek for making allegedly racist comments, so Bob Costas has got to go. So, yeah, the folks who are trading the billions out there who can hop on an airplane and land anywhere, and I just sent you a story. This was in Spiegel, their Spiegel magazine. This is a new study that came out. Share traders are more reckless than psychopaths. So it's incorrect to equate J.P. Morgan and Jamie Dimon to a psychopath. He's much more reckless than a psychopath.
Yes.
And that's what the problem is that you're dealing with much worse element than your common garden variety mass murderer. You're dealing with somebody who's diseased to the point of there is very little that's in the case history of medical records to really classify the mind of a Jamie Dimon or a Lloyd Blankfein or some of these bankers here in London. They've taken serial, you know, the point was made that you pointed at the top of the show that the current crisis has created devastation like a world war. Now, on my show, on Keiser Report, I interviewed the former top regulator at HBOS, which was the bank here in the UK, and we talked about the financial holocaust. In fact, yes, this is like a world war, and millions of people will die. So Lloyd Blankfein is a Holocaust provoker. Jamie Dimon is a Holocaust provoker. They're responsible for the murder of millions of people because they're beyond psychopathic. They're the worst, most degenerate minds that this species have ever put forward in many, many millions of years of evolution. This is what we've come to.
They are the alpha degenerate criminals who say they're doing God's work, destroying the world economy.
And the proof is in the people committing suicide every day around the world as the result of their austerity measures that they put in place to pay themselves these bonuses. I just got a story confirmed today that Papandreou, the former head of Greece, they just found 550 million euros in his mom's account. Remember that when they refused to do the referendum in Greece, giving the people a chance to vote on the Troika's takeover of Greece, I said at the time this was for some kind of payoff. And because there was a meeting with John Paulson, Lloyd Blankfein of Goldman Sachs, and Papandreou in Greece, talking about destroying Greece and carving up what's left.
Yeah, if I saw that, he should be immediately arrested. But, of course, he won't be. He'll probably be given a knighthood.
Well, that was the payoff. So 5,000 years of democracy was traded for a $550 million euro kickback to Papandreou. He sold his country for that amount of money. Now we know that the proof is in now the figures. They've got the numbers. They've got the timing. He sold out Greece for that amount of money. So that's beyond a pathology. I mean, that you're not even, some of the worst tyrants ever in history would be.
And how are they getting away with it? McClatchy confirms and says Al-Qaeda is being given missiles by the United States to attack all these countries like Syria. I mean, the government runs Al-Qaeda. Well,
to get back to a recurring theme, all of these wars and terrorist, banking terrorist and financial terrorism require money. And the money comes from slush funds, whether it's the shadow banking system, which has now been raised from 62 trillion. They just raised it up to 69 trillion is now believed to be in the shadow banking system. And that exists entirely due to interest rates being near 0%. So the central bankers who keep rates near 0%, that means if you're in the shadow banking system and you're running a war and you want to go invade a country and you need to borrow $10 billion, you can do so and borrow that money for near 0% interest. And that's what fuels the malevolent aspects of society, the cacocracy, the kleptocracy, the worst elements of our society. The sickest psychopaths in history are being fueled with borrowed money that they can borrow for 0%. Imagine if you take a Genghis Khan and you say, hey, Genghis, here's the bank. We're going to let you borrow any amount of money for 0% interest rate, and you never have to pay back the interest. Just how much do you need? 10 billion, 20 billion, 30 billion? The worst tyrants in history. Now we've given them carte blanche, an open check, blank check at 0% interest rate. So they're doing the worst things you could possibly imagine because they have all the money in the world to do the worst things. And there's nobody suggesting that interest rates should be increased because they keep saying, well, we have to worry about deflation. No, that's not true. You're causing the deflation. They're causing this catastrophe with low interest rates. To weed out this plague of banking terrorists, you need to raise interest rates to increase their cost of funds so they can't afford to do what they're doing. But no one's going to do that. As a matter of fact, they're dropping interest rates to below zero. In Switzerland, the rate on your savings account is now negative.
They make you pay to put money there because, and again, they have a depression in the real economy, but inflation in the goods, a double whammy. Also, they can give themselves free money. Amazing. Max Keiser, we've got 60 seconds left. Final comments.
Well, it's whether my date it holds up, my April date for a major break, possibly Japan, we'll see. I have no reason to move that date based on the increase in anxiety and pressures and gold purchases by central bank. These things are coming together in real time. I hope I'm correct because I'd like to go down, on your show as having called it to within a 1 week time period. That's my goal, to be the most prescient prognosticator of the year. I hope it works out.
Well said, Max Keiser of MaxKeiser.com. Thank you so much, Max.
All right, man. See you soon.
Talk to him soon. We're going to start doing a weekly report. Very exciting. Visit Infowars.com and PrisonPlanet.com. When you're on the site, you can also tune in 24 hours a day to my daily radio broadcast. There's also a free iPhone app to listen to the syndicated radio show when and where you want.